and welcome to Haunted Montreal's Spooky Story Sessions. I'm your host, Holly Rhiannon, and today I'm going to tell you all about the Lachine Canal. With over 200 documented ghost stories, Montreal is one of the most haunted cities in Canada, if not all of North America. Haunted Montreal is dedicated to researching these paranormal tales, and our channel brings you videos in both French and English every second Saturday. Today's episode examines one of Montreal's most haunted places, the Lachine Canal. During the day, its banks are bustling with citizens and tourists alike. But at night, the canal morphs into a dark, eerie, and desolate place reeking of the paranormal. But before we get into today's story, please remember to like, subscribe, and hit the bell button so you get notified every time we have a new tale to share. And hey, if you're already subscribed, thank you so much and welcome back. We're happy to have you here. Now, without further ado, let's get spooky. The Lachine Canal is widely considered to be one of Montreal's most haunted places. During the day, its banks are bustling with cyclists, dog walkers, people having picnics, sunbathers, but at night it's a different story. The polluted waterway is a dark, eerie, and desolate place reeking of the paranormal. Since the canal officially opened in 1825, hundreds of people have drowned in its dark waters. These drownings include the accidental kind, suicides, and murders. The banks are also peppered with old buildings, many being repurposed into condominiums that are reputed to be haunted. Last but not least, ghost ships are known to ply the canal's waters, but there are also an unknown number of bodies buried along its lengths. Mostly victims of the Irish famine in 1847, these forgotten corpses of desperate refugees result in all sorts of ghosts and paranormal activity along the canal. Going back in time, today's island of Montreal was formed approximately 10,000 years ago when an ancient sea drained away with the melting of the glaciers. Geographically, the archipelago is an ideal location for trade, with 12 rivers pouring into the area. Furthermore, anyone coming into the area was forced to stop and portage canoes, given that the islands are surrounded by dangerous rapids. As such, the ancestors of today's Kanien'kehá:ka or Mohawk First Nation established Hut'siwraken, a city of around 5,000 people which thrived on the island. According to Dr. Michael Dockstader, a Mohawk elder and specialist in Indigenous oral language, Hut'siwraken is an ancient ancestral place, an Indigenous place. The island was what I would call a metropolitan trade center. The Algonquin people would come down the Ottawa River from the Innu territories up the St. Lawrence, and then there would be the various Iroquois linguistic groups that would converge, and that was a major trade center. The Portage Trail, where the Lachine Canal is located today, followed a small river that led to a shallow lake. Before the arrival of French colonists, the banks of the lake were cultivated by the ancestors of today's Kanien'kehá:ka or Mohawk First Nation. Today's canal is situated on land originally granted by the King of France to the Sulpician Order. Beginning in 1689, attempts were made by the French colonial government and several other groups to build a canal that would allow ships to bypass the treacherous rapids. Sulpicians François de Salignac-Fénelon and Dollier de Casson spearheaded the first plans to dig the canal. The need for a canal to bypass the rapids was a major concern since the beginning of European colonization. In 1680, the Sulpicians had planned to build a canal between Ville-Marie and the village of Lachine to connect the various watercourses in the region. The word Lachine derives from French La Chine, China, and was named in 1667, apparently in mockery of its then owner Robert Cavelier de La Salle. He was known to explore the interior of the continent in an effort to find a passage to Asia. When he returned without success, he and his men were derisively named Les Chinois, or the Chinese. The name was adopted when the parish of Saint-Ange-de-Lachine was created in 1678, with the name Lachine appearing on subsequent maps for both the rapids and the village. The canal, which would have been the first in North America, was never completed due to a lack of funding, although several large sections were dug starting in 1689. Following the British conquest of 1760, there was a renewed interest in digging the canal. In 1821, a budget was prepared and 200 Irish natives from Griffintown were hired to dig the project. After 4 years of back-breaking labor, the canal was completed and opened to shipping traffic. It wasn't long before the canal needed to be deepened to allow heavier ships to pass through and to harness hydraulic power for the industries located on its banks. Work began in 1843, but trouble started immediately when construction work was privatized and workers received a wage cut of $1 a day, almost 30% of their salary. This sparked the first strike in Canadian history as workers stopped digging and demanded a wage increase at both the Lachine and Beauharnois Canal. At Beauharnois, authorities were alarmed, and 50 soldiers from the 74th Regiment under Major Campbell were brought in. Magistrate Laviolette read the riot act, and when the workers refused to disperse, he yelled out, "Major Campbell, fire!" The soldiers raised their muskets and fired into the crowd, causing a scene of panic. At least 6 workers were killed by bullets, 4 of them shot in the back as they fled. A priest on the scene named Father Falvey cursed the magistrate, calling him a coward and a murderer. However, an inquiry later cleared the government, declaring it to be a case of justifiable homicide. It was a dark moment in the canal system's history. By 1850, factories were springing up along the canal's banks. With the enlargement of the Lachine Canal and its plentiful hydraulic power, huge foundries, factories, and metalworks were built, their smokestacks spewing out noxious black clouds. Giant ships would frequently dock to load and unload cargo, and the area was soon known as Canada's cradle of industrialization. Residents of working-class neighborhoods like Griffintown were put to work in the factories, often for 14 hours a day, 6 days a week, in grueling conditions. Women and children, some as young as 6 years old, earned a lot less than a man for the exact same job. With no environmental standards in place, the Lachine Canal and its banks were soon heavily polluted with dangerous chemicals and metals such as chromium, lead, zinc, copper, and mercury. This continued until around the 1950s, when the expansion of the port and the opening of the St. Lawrence Seaway in 1959 on the other side of the river made the Lachine Canal obsolete. The factories began closing up shop, and over 20,000 people were put out of work. The neighborhood began dying as people moved away in search of better prospects. The canal was neglected, and at one point the entrance was used as a dump for debris from the Expo 67 metro construction, closing it to shipping. Eventually, it was re-excavated, and Parks Canada took over in 2002, transforming the canal into a linear park with a bike path. As for the pollution, they decided to simply not disturb the contaminated sediments at the bottom of the canal. The pollution is still down there, a twisted reminder of the canal's deranged history. Today, the canal has ghosts and hauntings all along its 14.5-kilometer trajectory, both in the dark waters and along the shoreline, including in many of the old buildings. Starting in the water itself, there are reports of ghost ships plying the waterway and the spirits of the dozens of people who drowned in the canal. Coolopolis author Christian Gravner researched some of these drownings in his blog, as follows. The waters have not spared children or elderly women, as people of all types breathed their last breaths before their bodies were fished out in macabre scenes all too familiar to city dwellers. Many were suicides, others murder victims, and many others were people who just drowned after swimming or slipping in fully clothed. Former Griffintown resident Denis Delaney described children swimming in the canal and drowning when boats suddenly shifted against the banks, forcing the doomed kids under the water. Gravner describes the Lachine Canal as a watery graveyard and Montreal's spookiest place. The spirits of the drowned can sometimes be heard in the waters and manifest themselves as unusual splashes, waters thrashing about for no reason, and gurgling noises emanating from the depths of the canal. There were also countless industrial accidents along the Lachine Canal which resulted in hauntings. For example, the spirit of a nervous young boy wearing a black suit has been spotted on several occasions on the swing bridge. He appears to be running across the length of the bridge before leaping and disappearing into thin air. There is a theory as to who this ghost might be. At around 9 p.m. on the evening of Tuesday, September 17, 1908, a little boy was attempting to cross the Lachine Canal from the south side by using the swing bridge. He was wearing a black suit with knee-high pants. The bridge was designed to swing 90 degrees to allow canal boats through, meaning cars and pedestrians had to wait for a ship to pass before the bridge would swing back into place. When the boy arrived on the south side, the bridge began to swing to allow a boat to pass. He jumped onto the bridge to catch a ride across the canal. The bridge keeper didn't notice, as many pedestrians in a hurry would jump on the bridge as it swung. They had to wait in the middle as a ship passed. Once the ship was through, the bridge began swinging back into its regular position, connecting both sides of Wellington Street. Unfortunately, the boy attempted to jump off on the Griffintown side before the bridge had swung fully into place, and instead of landing on the street, he fell between the abutment and the bridge. He was crushed before the bridgekeeper could cut the electricity to the structure. When the bridgekeeper realized what had happened, he swung the bridge back out again, and people pulled up the mangled body of a boy with brown hair of about 13 years of age. In his suit pocket was a Montreal Swimming Club card bearing the name Arthur Carr. An ambulance brought him to the general hospital, but the surgeon on duty noted that the boy was killed instantly when crushed by the Wellington Street Bridge. The boy was placed in the morgue, but no one claimed his body. Instead, he was sent to anatomy. The most prominent theory about the haunting is that young Arthur Carr's ghost remained after the tragic incident that killed him. He was probably in a hurry to get home to the Griff after attending some sort of church function on the other side in Point St. Charles, which may be why he was so well dressed. Sometimes when a person is killed suddenly, their ghost returns but is not aware that they are actually dead. There is speculation that the ghost of the boy appears because he is still trying to return to his family home in the Griff all these years later. Running below the rusting swing bridge is the decrepit and abandoned Wellington Tunnel, another haunted site which we've talked about in previous videos. Desolate and foreboding, crumbling, and graffiti scrawled, the tunnel is strewn with garbage and its hidden entrance is sealed off with concrete blocks and prison-like bars. The place feels extremely creepy and dangerous and is known to house several ghosts, including one of a man carrying a bucket of blood. As for the buildings, one of the most famous hauntings occurred in the Redpath sugar refinery when it was abandoned and used as a shelter by homeless people. According to the Narcity blog, the bike path that runs along it passes several haunted buildings, like the former Redpath factory, for example. A spirit would wander with the mission of dislodging the homeless people squatting in the place by chilling the air and releasing an abominable stench. Today, the Redpath is the site of luxury condominiums, and it is unknown if these paranormal activities continue for the more affluent residents who live there now. Other buildings that are reputed to be haunted include Silo No. 5, the Belding Paul and Company Limited buildings, the old malt factory, and the Fur Trade Museum in Lachine. Going back in time again, the Lachine Canal was also hard hit by the Irish famine of 1847, resulting in many more ghosts and paranormal activities. One of these includes a regiment of ghostly British redcoats who have been spotted marching along the banks in military unison with bayonets in the air. In the summer of 1847, Montreal was a city of 50,000 people. Due to the famine exacerbated by British colonial inaction, Montreal was completely overwhelmed by 75,000 Irish refugees, most of whom made the crossing on coffin ships. Many were suffering from starvation and typhus, a highly contagious disease. Due to a shortage of canal boats, many of the refugees chose to walk the canal path to Lachine. According to reports, many of them died on the banks of the canal and were buried on the spot in unmarked graves. Despite aid from various religious institutions and Mayor John Easton Mills himself, the death toll that year was staggering. 6,000 Irish victims, almost 1,000 Montreal residents, at least 8 Catholic priests, 13 nuns, and 7 Anglican clergymen all perished from typhus. In early November, the mayor dropped out of sight, and citizens began to wonder what had happened to him. It turns out that Mayor Mills contracted typhus himself during his duties. According to his doctor, he never issued a word of complaint about the pain or his misfortune. He died on November 12th at the young age of 54. An elaborate funeral was held, and he was declared Montreal's martyr mayor for his heroic efforts. His ghost is known to wander the site of Montreal's first fever sheds at the Wellington Basin on the south side of the canal late at night. It is as though he is still caring for his charges in a paranormal afterlife. Thousands of orbs have also been photographed at this site, sometimes floating about in the air. One local resident went into a trance and the orbs appeared in front of him. He felt as though the dead were wailing, perhaps a likely paranormal occurrence given that the site also contains the first Irish famine cemetery, which is presently not marked in any way. In conclusion, the Lachine Canal is indeed a very haunted waterway. Wandering its eerie banks at night is a spooky experience, one not recommended for the faint of heart. It's advisable to go in pairs or a group, because you never know what might be lurking in the dark waters, the old factories, or the haunted shoreline of the Lachine Canal. Are you a Montreal resident or perhaps a tourist who's encountered something strange along the Lachine Canal? If so, we'd love to hear about it. As always, we want to know your opinions on what could be going on. Thank you so much for stopping by. If this is your first video, we do hope you'll stick around for the next one. We put new videos out every second Saturday in both French and English. If you'd like to learn more about the organization founded by the talented Donovan King, it's all listed in the description down below, along with links to purchase tickets to in-person haunted storytelling experiences. Remember to like, subscribe, and leave a comment. We'll have a new video out in a couple weeks, but until then, stay spooky.